Welcome to my Shockwave Cyclone progression guide to high tier red maps. In this guide I'm gonna go over what passive nodes you need to pick, what gems you need to buy, how to gear your character when you're very weak, how to make efficient use of the very few resources you get early on, and I'm also gonna go over map progression, how to get to tier 16s really fast, how to get your 2 void stones on day 1, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about early game gear progression. So the first thing that's important to know is in 3.25 the game will remove flat damage from skill gems, from attack skill gems, so it becomes pretty important to get decent-ish gear already at the start. So what I recommend is to first, before you make your duel list, is to create a Ranger Mule. And the Ranger Mule basically checks the vendor. So you're gonna check the vendor for certain colors. In our case, for 3 red, 2 red, 1 green, or 1 green, 1 red. You also want to look for movement speed boots. And if you have wisdom scrolls left, you want to buy a rustic sash, and you want to check the implicit for a high tier. And if you have still 3 wisdom scrolls left, you also want to buy an iron ring. Now this will help you go through the early game pretty comfortably. So in general, what you want to look for, what currency you want to pick up, basically transmutation orbs. And you want to pick up early on in Act 1, I would say, couple magic items, because they will sell for true transmutation shards. If you sell them unidentified, if they are rare and unidentified items, they will sell for 5 transmutation shards. And these transmutation orbs you will need for resistance class. You also need alteration orbs, which you get by selling identified items. 2 for magic items. I wouldn't identify magic items. I would only do this with rare items. You also want to get a few blacksmith whetstones. A good source for them are artisan strongboxes. But if you don't find any blacksmith whetstones, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now these whetstones are important for the vendor recipe that gives a weapon increased physical damage, and you can also use them to get quality on weapons. And if you don't need either of these, you can also sell them for 4 wisdom scrolls. You also want to do essences. Because we do need essences for a increased physical damage vendor recipe, and they also help to craft your gear, because they basically act as alchemy orbs and will turn a item into a rare one. And ideally, if you're not very familiar with the Veil fight, you also want sapphire rings, which you can get by selling an iron ring together with a blue gem. So from level 1 to 4, I would recommend, after you reach town, I would recommend using first Frostblades, which you get from the Ranger Mule, and you use that skill gem till level 4, where you get Blood and Sand. Now you could already use Perforate level 2, but Perforate has 2 modes, Blood and Sand stance, and in the Blood stance is more tailored towards, Blood stance has a very low area effect. To enable the sand stance, which is the more of a clearing mode for Perforate, you need Blood and Sand, the Blood and Sand gem, which you get at level 4. So I recommend using Perforate, because the alternative to Perforate would be Spectral. It is one of the best leveling skills, but it requires pretty good positioning to get the most damage out of it. So for beginners, I would say use Perforate. At level 4, after Marflet's quest, you get Blood and Sand, which is necessary for Perforate. You also get War Banner, which provides you a temporary buff, which will change in 3.24. I believe it's more physical damage now in 3.24. And you'd also want to buy a Frostblink, and you want to keep the Frostblink at level 1, because it is an intelligence-based skill gem, and we do not get a lot of int. So you also get Dash, which will be your movement skill for now, until you are able to use Frostblink. After you kill Brutus at level 8, you can get the added fire damage support gem, which will replace momentum. Then you can also, which you also get as a vendor reward, is Leap Slam, and you want to buy fast attacks. Fast attacks will cost you 1 transmutation orb, and Leap Slam together with fast attacks will be your movement skill. You don't want to level up Leap Slam, because if you level up Leap Slam, the mana cost of this skill will increase. So you keep this skill gem at level 1, and you never level it up because you don't need to deal damage with this skill gem. And ideally you also have 2 mana flasks for the majority of the campaign actually, until you get reduced mana cost of attacks, passive nodes, or the minus mana cost Aerion rings. So an important early vendor recipe is the Rustic Sash with the Whetstone recipe. So what you do is you sell your weapon, sell for example a weapon that's not very good. For example, you sell an axe or a sword together with a rare Rustic Sash and a Whetstone. And what that will do is basically return you a weapon with the Serrated mod, which gives you increased physical damage. You can also get a lower tier mod if you do this, if you use a magic Rustic Sash. The best way to get a rare Rustic Sash would be to use an essence to make this rare Rustic Sash, but you can also use an alchemy orb. Now I wouldn't recommend using an alchemy orb because you need alchemy orbs to buy gems later on, and you also need it for map progression. Now another useful vendor recipe is the Augment Orb, to sell an Augment Orb together with a Quicksilver and your boots. And what that will do is give you boots back with 10% increased movement speed, and you can repeat this recipe to increase the tier of that movement speed. So if your weapon is a bit weak, if your damage feels a little bit weak, you want to check the vendor for better bases. Now for example at level 9 you can equip J Chopper, or at level 8 you can equip Longsword. And these weapon bases will always show up 1 level before you can equip them. And it's pretty important to check to have good weapons, because in 3.25 you won't have any flat damage on your skill gem, so you're completely reliant on either gems like Chance to Bleed or just having better gear. So here I have leveling trees from 13 to 84. They're usually in 12 level steps. So this is gonna be your tree at level 13. So afterwards in Act 2, you want to look for a Turquoise Amulet. We are strength-based characters. We don't get that much dexterity, intelligence. So we want to fill these attributes with a Turquoise Amulet. And that enables us later on to use Blood Rage. And also to use Frostblink. And after Fidelitas quest, you can get Blood Rage, which you will need to generate Frenzy Charges, and you also get extra attack speed. At the downside of having a degen, a 4% of your, take 4% every second of your life. You can also get a Herald of Purity and a Herald of Ash. All these gems cost Alteration Orbs. Now I would make sure before you buy Herald of Purity or Herald of Ash or Warlord's Mark that you still have 2 Alteration Orbs, so you can get melee physical damage support and close combat, which are really good support gems for Perforate. And if you still have some Alteration Orbs left after that, you can get Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash, which will boost your damage. And Warlord's Mark, you can use this to generate rage basically. To generate rage with Warlord's Mark, you need to stun the opponent, and then you will get 10 rage for a stun. And Warlord's Mark also provides a little bit sustain against monsters. So at level 24, you will start seeing falling bases at the vendor, at the Act 3 vendor and onwards. And you want to look for 3 red, 1 green. Also, you can get Pride and Vulnerability. These 2 gems will boost your damage significantly. At level 28 you can switch to Shockwave Cyclone, but you will need maces, or you will need a mace or a staff to use Shockwave. So ideally you'll be looking for such weapons already before you hit level 28. And if you don't get a good one, I would just delay the switch. It's not a big deal because Perforate is pretty strong. So ideally you get a mace, because a mace will be easier to roll. If you have a staff, then you probably use infused channeling, because a staff is strength and int based, so the chances of rolling a blue socket are pretty high. In that case, you want to do the library quest, because there you will get infused channeling, which is a blue gem and is ideal for Cyclone. And you will also get Pulverize, which increases the AoE of Cyclone and also gives you more damage. 24. This mastery is pretty good, gives 40% increased damage. These nodes give you a little bit of physical damage reduction. So you acquire Cyclone after you kill Crivicius in Act 3 from Maramoa. And you link this with, the first gem you link it with is Shockwave. Then you can use melee physical damage. So you won't be able to use close combat anymore, because close combat only goes with sword and axes. And as your fourth gem, you want, if you did the library quest, you would use Pulverize. But if you don't have Pulverize, you can use Chance to Bleed. I don't very much like Chance to Bleed, but because they remove flat damage from the skill gems, I think this one is kind of okayish as a support gem. But you will be replacing this support gem in Act 6 after you do the Twilight Strand quest, where you can buy Pulverize and Infused Channeling. So level 36 is what the tree looks like. So you want to pick these nodes because they help you with getting Dexterity and Intelligence. Dexterity and Intelligence is otherwise difficult to get. This, of course, you also get Dex and Int from your Turquoise Amulet. This is to ensure that you can use your skill gems. And you would want to start pathing down here. These damage nodes are pretty efficient. And if you do need more int, you can click this node. So afterwards, you progress to Act 5. And in Act 6, you're gonna get a resistance penalty. After you kill Kitava, you'll get a resistance penalty. So you want to make sure that you have like roughly or close to 105% elemental resistances. If you're a little bit below, it's not a big deal, but ideally you use Hatred, Anger, Wrath essences on your armor pieces or belts, because these essences give resistances. You want to check your gear for the suffixes so you can craft resistances. You also want to use your, if you're lacking in damage, you want to use your Contempt essences on your weapon, on a normal weapon, normal rarity weapon. And you can use the rest of your essences on rings. That's what I recommend. And hopefully you get a resistance roll on these rings or amulets. And ideally also in open suffix. So I would, in Act 5, I would stay in Chamber of Innocence till level 42, because that zone has very good experience. Because there are many magic monsters. Magic monsters give increased experience, as well as more loot. And if you're a beginner, I would even stay there till 45, so you're a bit stronger. 48, nothing special. You do want this Fortify, otherwise you want to Fortify Mastery, otherwise you have to use the Fortify support. And you want this one Rage on hit, melee hit node, because Rage now gives you more attack damage, and for this one node you can basically get up to 30% more attack damage, so this is pretty OP. Oh, something that I didn't mention, if you're struggling to cap your resistances, you can click these diamond skin nodes. Obviously you get hit with a resistance penalty in Act 6, or after killing Kitava rather. You can also click these nodes and these two. So these are your options. So 60, you can go for more defensive nodes like these max res nodes. Get more armor with these. Yeah, also helps you. So to get ready for maps, you want a decent mace and a staff. the jump from campaign to maps is actually pretty huge. So you want pretty good gear. If you don't have a decent staff or mace, you want to use a condemned essence on a mace or staff and craft increased physical damage, or if it has increased physical damage already, you want to craft increased attack speed. And if your character is too weak, if you feel like you're dying a lot, or if you don't deal enough damage, you can farm the Desecrated Chambers. The Desecrated Chambers is very similar to the Chamber of Sins. There are a lot of magic packs. Those magic packs give increased loot, increased experience, so you can farm them. Or you can also do Merc Lab or Merciless Lab, which will give you a lot more currency, because there are these treasure chests that you can open. They give you items. Izara himself gives you a lot of items, but that zone has pretty bad experience. But what you can also do there is get decent transfigure gems, and you can also get the quality craft and use it on your Cyclone to get more movement speed. Or you can use the transfigure gem crafts on gems and sell them for a pretty high price. But ideally, you wouldn't do any of these steps. You wouldn't farm Merc Lab or Desecrated Chambers, because it is I would say it's pretty inefficient. But if you're a beginner, it's not a bad move. I think it's actually recommended. 72, pretty straightforward. After you click Smashing Strikes, you want to click these endurance charge nodes, and you can also already start speccing into some crit nodes here, for example, because we are now going crit, and you can use Assassin's Mark instead of Vulnerability. And you want these Sovereignty, you start pathing towards Sovereignty, so you can use Determ, Pride, as well as Blood and Sand. So for map progression, what's important is I wouldn't recommend full clearing white maps. I would just focus on map objectives, because you can progress through yellow maps even if you don't full clear maps by buying maps from Kirek with chance orbs. So you need a lot of chance orbs if you're gonna do that. And you can get chance orbs going to the jewelry vendor and buying chance orbs with fusings. And if you do a Kirek mission, it will also refresh the vendor, so you can buy new maps. And you always want to check if you have completed the map objective. You do that by holding the Alt key and hovering over the map. So alchemy orbs are needed to buy rare maps, so that's why we didn't use them in the campaign to craft our gear. And you also need to alch your yellow maps to complete map objectives. Now I still wouldn't full clear the tier 6, tier 7, tier 8 maps unless you are running out of Kirek missions and you don't have maps or maps to buy. And for red maps, I wouldn't use Chaos Orbs to buy red maps, because you will need a lot of Chaos Orbs for the physical damage crafts, as well as the area and ring crafts, which are essential to reduce the Cyclone mana cost. It is pretty difficult to get a good fizz weapon as a drop, because weapons have a very high mod pool and the weighting of the increased physical damage mod is rather low. One way to get really good physical damage weapons, or not really good physical damage weapons, decent-ish for the early game, is Betrayal. So what you do is, Betrayal, you can get the increased physical damage unveil on weapons. And if you get another good mod with a open affix on your weapon, you get a very decent weapon. So this is one way to improve your damage tremendously. Now you will also need to get the Arion signature craft, which reduces the mana cost of skills. If you don't do that, you need to use life tap support, which is not a very ideal support gem. And another benefit of Betrayals, in the early game at least, is you can get tier 3 or tier 4 Vorici. Basically, tier 3 refers to the ranks, and if it's tier 4, it means that you're... So you need to have Vorici and Transport. If your Vorici is at rank 3, and you do a Katarina safe house, you will get a tier 4 Vorici. A tier 3 Vorici will give you a crafting bench that links your item 50 times. And if you get a tier 4, you will get 2 of these crafting benches. And Vorici is also important because he has the signature mod increased damage while leeching. And as Slayer we have overleech, so we are almost always leeching. Betrayal will also provide you with other early game gear, especially rings and amulets, because you can do the fire and chaos, you can do the resistance unveils, and you can do life unveils, and then you can craft another good mod onto that ring. So for defenses, in 3.25, endurance charges will be buffed. Now they also give you elemental reduction, and with Cyclone Shockwave, Wheel Staffs, and the notable Smashing Strike, has the line 10% chance to gain endurance charge on melee critical strike. Now after you allocate this notable, you can go for max endurance charges, and this will be endurance charges will be a great way to mitigate elemental damage and physical damage, and that physical damage reduction of endurance charges is additive with the physical damage reduction you get from armor. Now I don't recommend dropping determination, but you could do it if you have enough endurance charges and you feel like you're tanky enough against physical damage. And at level 84 you get a little bit of accuracy. If you don't have any accuracy on your gear, you can click these nodes. These are pretty efficient, especially this accuracy mastery. So for high tier rap maps, you want to look for certain upgrades. So as previously mentioned, you get from Vorici the signature mod increased damage while leeching. You get roughly 40% increased damage from this craft. So it's really good. You want to look for accuracy rating on your jewelry or helmet or gloves. It's most likely to roll on gloves and helmets. And you want a pretty decent staff with like 400 physical DPS from Betrayal, or you just buy one from the trade site. You also want to start using the Arrogance and Precision setup. What Arrogance does is you reserve life instead of mana. And because Precision reserves a flat value and not a percentage value, it is okay to use it to reserve life with it. And ideally you also want a 5-link, which you either can get from Vorici by using these crafting benches, or you just buy it on trades, which typically on day 1 costs like 1 to 2 chaos orbs. And you can either use melee physical as a 5th link or infused channeling. Infused channeling has the advantage that you will also get a little bit tankier. So for defense, you want to allocate these max resistance masteries. So for one, for example, is if every armor piece of yours has armor, you will get +1 to all max resistances. The other one is if you're reserving life, you will get 1 to max resistances. So make sure you click these nodes. They give you quite a bit of elemental reduction. And I also recommend going for max endurance charges. You can also click the 2-hand mastery, which makes so I think for every red socket that your main hand weapon has, you get 10% increased armor. And you can also go for the staff mastery, which increases your defenses by 30%, which will help you with physical mitigation. So I'm gonna briefly talk about the Atlas tree, or rather the rushing to 2 void stones past tree. So I usually start off by going in this direction for Betrayal. So 40% should be enough to get all the important unveils, get decent-ish gear from Betrayal up to when you hit level 85-ish, should probably have all the unveils that you need and some decent gear from Betrayal. Then I start pathing up here, click these nodes, and go for Kirac missions. Kirac missions you need to buy, to reset the vendor, to buy maps, and of course to get your map completions also through the Atlas missions. And you want to increase your chance to drop higher tier maps with these nodes. I would start pathing to these higher tier nodes, chance to drop higher tier nodes, and this one as well. And by that point, when you're about to hit level, when you're about to enter red tier maps, I would start clicking for extra content here. Now we don't do ritual, but what ritual does is add extra monsters, and those extra monsters can drop maps. And same reason for shrines. Shrines also give you a buff, but the main reason we click shrines is to get extra monsters. Extra monsters means that they can drop maps, and you click this node and you get 20 extra passive skill points, and you can use them on more shrine nodes. You can use them on strongbox nodes here that will add extra monsters. We have strongbox nodes here. I'm not sure if there are more. Actually, there should be here the cartographers, strongbox nodes. And yeah, that's gonna be your Atlas progression, rushing Exarch Ether, but you wouldn't use this Atlas tree to make money. You would then switch to, you usually given the option to switch to your Atlas trees, and then you would take another Atlas tree.